And good afternoon. Welcome to today's lockdown learning session for FlexCareers. We love having you guys along. Big crowd today, so we'll try to get through a bunch of stuff and deliver you guys some real practical takeaways and the way that we see this return to the office going. A couple of weeks ago, Maja and I put out a note that basically gave what we thought might be an outline of this whole process. So phase one being lead with adrenaline and let's just get people out the door. Phase two being, we might need to make this sustainable for a while, and so we'll worry about a whole bunch of mental health, mental wellness, and leadership capabilities. And now it's down to phase three, which is now where HR folks and leaders generally are taking what they've learned from the last few weeks and building back better. We're now in the phase where we want to design our future work, and so that's what we want to chat about today. So with me, I've got the wonderful Maja Paleka, who runs the Flex Ready business for us with Juggle Strategies. And yeah, so Maja, welcome. And what can people expect to learn about today?
Thank you, Joel. Well, I think you've introduced it really, really beautifully. So we're going to talk a little bit about, I always like to take stock as to where we're at, and then kind of the way we're seeing some of the things play out. And I guess the purpose for us is as well to share some of the learnings that we're seeing and speaking to a lot of the organizations that we are talking to, looking at the market, really learning about where we're at, and then getting you to think about it, I guess, a little bit differently. I think mindset and the approach to the situation right now are going to be a really big one. So let's get through it. So as I said, I love taking stock. So for me right now, this has been such an interesting, if we reflect over the last, what are we at, 7 weeks, I think it is now. It's been such an interesting period. We had this moment of reaction, and I think it's just was beautiful to see so many organizations that in the past, you know, we've talked about remote working, we've talked about the digital capability to do that. We've talked about, you know, just really kind of, you know, distributing, I guess, their workforce in a bit more of a way, who were always hesitating. We saw them make it happen in a matter of days, and it worked really well. Of course, there were some hiccups, technology and all that sort of stuff, but worked really, really well. And we saw then organizations, I guess, even pivot in the way they manage people and think about people. We saw CEOs and leaders that leaned into compassion and to empathy, for some of them, you know, quite deeply uncomfortable, I guess, some of those things, but almost shifting leadership styles and shifting the way they looked at people. And then obviously HR teams always looking at people, but really sort of coming to the fore and taking over, I guess, the approach and really looking after the people. So one of the consequences of that, if we look at you know, where we're at today, is that there's been actually some of the research is showing, and Willis Towers Wilson, an advisory firm, did some research as to how are people feeling today. Our levels of trust and our levels of engagement have gone up, which is amazing, right? So they are actually some of the highest levels of where we've been before. So I guess I just want to make sure that, you know, sometimes we tend to go through this, as Joel said, in a bit of an adrenaline rush, to take a moment and actually take stock and go, what have we done and what are we doing right now that is causing this incredible increase in trust and incredible increase in people engagement? And let's try to not lose that. And I guess that's the first mindset, is almost a reflective practice inside organizations is something that would be wonderful, which then takes us sort of to where we're seeing things and how they're playing out right now. So Joel, if you go to the next slide, I guess what we're sort of looking at, there seems to be a bit of a spectrum of organizations and where you are in this moment. We're seeing, you know, quite a few people sort of still in the crisis management mode, and especially now as we're sort of considering that return to work and what's that going to look like and all that type of stuff. So there's a bit of that, like, I guess, still adrenaline, still reactive mode. But we are also seeing organizations with a couple on the complete opposite end of the spectrum as well, which are now starting to think about, okay, hold on, things have changed. What else can we change? What else can we build on? What else? How do we go bigger? How do we go better? How do we, you know, make sure that we're sort of, you know, transforming really as things are going on? And the only thing that I would say in this whole place is, I guess we gotta hold those two things together at the same time, which they can be sort of opposite ends of the spectrum. And I guess either end of the spectrum always carries a bit of risk. So maybe, you know, the first place to sort of sit down and think about is sort of saying, which mode are we going in? Which mode are we operating from? And let's just take a moment and make sure that we're not going too far in either direction, and actually step this out and make sure we're thinking at this programmatically, I guess, and properly as well. Joel, I'll get you to go to the next one as well. So the way we're sort of seeing it, there's sort of three distinct but very connected phases as to how things are playing out in the next slide. So we're in the now. You know, people are still quite a bit, most of the people are working from home. And listen, some organizations are leaving their people at home. We've just heard that Google has said, you know, up until the end of this year, they're not really asking anyone to come back into the office. So, you know, that now might stay a now for quite a lot of people. But there is really, I guess, in the Australian and the New Zealand market and across Asia Pacific as well, we're seeing a little bit of as well, that idea of, okay, we're looking at transition, we're looking at opening our offices, we're looking at, you know, what is this going to look like and how do we plan for that? And it's such an incredible time and a lot of unknown, I think a lot of uncertainty. Somebody described it the other day, you don't even know what you don't know yet. We're learning as we go. And then there's that third, the build back better stage. So maybe I'll just introduce the concept, build back better. And it is one that we have very much stolen, I guess. It comes from the UN in 2006 introduced this concept is an idea of sort of recovery and reconstruction. And the idea is that whenever you have some sort of a disaster or, you know, and you can look at it from business continuity practices as well, you would never take if let's say you had a facility that you had a fire in or something, you would never just build the exact same facility again. That would be really a waste, I guess, of some learnings. So what you would do is you would look at, okay, hold on, this was the facility, this is how it operated, this is how we operated within it. What have we learned from having worked within that environment? And how do we make sure that we now build a much better facility? So the same sort of thing for UN, right? In any disaster and recovery, we need to make sure we really take a good stock of where we're at, what have we learned, what's changed, and how do we build back a better organization. So, you know, love the concept from, you know, where it is from that perspective. And I think it's so appropriate and so applicable to where we are today. And I think it's just a good little mantra to make sure that we are approaching and looking at things with going forward. So if we look at sort of, you know, I guess what we talked about earlier is, you know, can we take stock of the levels of trust and the increase in trust that we've had? Can we take stock and look at what has caused such an increase in engagement? What have we done differently? And then, by the way, you know, what are people doing differently on a day-to-day basis? And how do we ensure that we then, all those ideas and skills and capabilities we continue building and leveraging going forward as well? Joel, if you go to the next one. Sorry to geek out a little bit. I like to use some of the models, and you know, everybody sort of that studied a little bit of psych knows the good old Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I think it's quite actually appropriate here to think about the transition stage and the building back better stage. And I think every single one of those actually addresses a little bit of a different need. So the transition stage is a managing the risk and business continuity stage. It is all about how do we really make sure that the workplaces that people are coming back to are going to be safe. And the definition of safe, by the way, is quite a broad one right now. And I know Joel's going to go into a little bit of that now, but everything from testing to cleaning to how many people do we have in the office to all that type of stuff, to actually even managing the people themselves. Do they want to come in or not? You know, do they feel safe coming in and getting on public transport? Do they have are they in the high risk category? What is their situation at home in terms of homeschooling? Are children at home, therefore they can't come in, all that type of stuff. So the transition stage is a bit of a messy one. And it really is about that managing risk and business continuity. And as far as, you know, when you really think about it from a Maslow side of things, it is looking after the safety needs of people. And it's really going to be focused heavily there. This is where IT, facilities, and HR really come together. And this is where we really got to make sure that, you know, we've got all three different groups sort of working together and are 100% aligned. Then there's the building back better stage, and it kind of, we need to look after this transition stage in order for build back better to kind of have a good foundation to go. It's really building back better stage is looking at the self-actualization at the organizational level, right? So it is about, let's have that perspective of who we want to be and what type of organization do we want to build. How do we, you know, as everybody's been sort of overutilizing a little bit that expression, never waste a good crisis. How do we take the crisis that we've gone through and look at that incredible build of capability and make sure we don't lose that? But I think it's important to recognize that they sort of have to be handled a little bit one by one. And I guess, you know, from our perspective is there still seems to be quite a bit of extremes, I guess, in terms of organization. Some are just in deep, just transition stage. And I guess to a certain degree, the mindset there is that things are just going to go back to the way they were before. Right? It is, how do we just manage this in the meantime period while the world is looking through the vaccine? But really, a lot of the time, it sounds like when we're discussing this with the organization, that the assumption is that by and large, we're going to go back to what we did before and how we were before. And then the building back better stage is wonderful, right? It is about that transformation, and it is about not just about flexible working, by the way. This is about completely even reconsidering business models and you know, which clients we go to and who we access and all that type of stuff, and how do we even deal with them. But I think if you are deeply in that stage and your transition is not really, really well looked after, you are going after self-actualization without having really deeply addressed the safety needs. So it's, I guess, you know, from a time perspective, we got to look after one, and I think until we can get to the other, until the people can even have the mental capacity to, I guess, deal with that transformation. The only thing, that being said, I just want you to kind of, I guess, keep one thing in mind. I think what's important about the transition stage in that it has a little bit of a perspective of who do we want to be. And so what I mean by that is, if we are wanting to be an organization that's going to be people-led, that's going to be about empowerment, and that it's going to be about giving people some autonomy and everything else around flexibility, then you do have to have that perspective onto your transition as well. So, you know, as we said, all those levels of trust, all that, you know, period where we're in right now, that we were really led by the needs of our people. I guess just be careful that we don't lose that in that transition period. And there seems to be a bit of a reaction to try to build some certainty in, and through that, quite a lot of process that is very prescriptive process. And then what ends up happening in that is the managers are going to try to execute on that, right, without a little bit of leeway. So just be careful that, I guess, you have the build back better perspective as you are building your transition stage, and that you make sure that all those wonderful things that you have now built inside your organization, and also who you want to be, actually doesn't get destroyed in that transition stage. And I think the number one risk there is how your frontline managers and how your frontline leaders actually go ahead and execute and make this happen, and I guess bring it to life as well. Without some really clear direction and support for your frontline managers, there could be that, I guess, tendency to go and get quite prescriptive and go, you know, red team, green team, you're coming in, you're not coming in today, without that two-way conversation and being completely, to a certain degree, led by the people themselves, and making sure that they're comfortable and that all their safety needs, I guess, are fully met, and that you don't sort of compromise some of that trust and stuff like that you've built in the meantime. I'd also sort of say, from having spoken to some of our clients as well, be mindful that we can make some assumptions that are just a bias situation, and some of your leaders might go down that place. You know, we are in organizations, some of them, that are trying to make sure that the business is not compromised, that we are trying to make up possibly some, you know, impact to the business that happened over the last few weeks. So, you know, there could be these assumptions that, okay, well, we need to go really, really fast now. We got to get back. We got to get working. let's bring everyone back into the office, because by the way, that's the best place. And I would really, really question that. There's quite a few conversations. If you actually break that down, coming into the office, what is that going to mean, right? It's going to mean people lining up for the lifts for a very long time, because only a couple of people can fit in the lift at a time. Then they're going to go up into your premises and they're going to be spread around the offices. But let's say if somebody does need to go to the printer, one person at a printer, so a little bit of waiting for the printer. Now, what about your kitchens? Are only a certain amount of people going to be able to come into the kitchen? So there's actually, if you think about the movement of people around the office, there's quite a bit of waiting. And there's going to be quite a bit of sort of pausing. And even if you think about, we're bringing people into the office for them to have some face-to-face and interaction. Well, hold on, only half of your team or whatever percentage is in the office. So all your meetings might still need to be done on Zoom, because the other half of the participants are actually still at home. So, when you actually play some of these plans out, I would just, caution you, encourage you to really think through why is it that, the preference is in certain organizations that some people come into the office. Now, I will acknowledge 100% that some people are absolutely struggling being from home, and I'm, by the way, one of them. I cannot wait to get back into the office. So yes, you do need to, I'm not saying we shouldn't open up the offices. That should be the option. Some people also, from a safety perspective and everything else, should have the option of coming into the office. So I acknowledge that, and the choice should be there. But I guess all I wanted to sort of caution you from is being very prescriptive as to how we do that, and sort of mandating things or letting your managers mandate things, even though the HR perspective hasn't been there. And just the last one from me, Joel, is just a conversation about really, when you are thinking about this, make sure that whatever your plan is, that you actually bring it to life throughout the organization. So, when we work with clients in terms of, let's say it's flexibility, and in the past that was that, it's great to write a policy, it's great to write a strategy, but if it hasn't been brought to life and really embedded inside your organization, and we love the J.L. Galbraith STAR model, which is around organizational design, you can use any of your change programs, and you can look at any other models and frameworks as to how you bring it to life. Having written a policy is not going to be enough. People will tend to go one way or another in terms of their biases. They will try to cling to some level of certainty. And for some of them, it's the office. For others, it's just the home. So, make sure that you have a strategy, that you understand that all the levels of the organization are aligned to what you're doing. There is a distinct process about how to deal with these issues if they do come aligned. How are you going to nudge behaviors? And we can talk about that forever. Joel and I love our nudge, to make sure that people are doing it in the right way. Are your people, do they have the right skill set to deal with this transitional period or the build back better period, if that is sort of what you're looking at? And then how are you going to motivate people? I don't mean incentives in terms of cash incentives, but how are you going to motivate people to I guess, bring the whatever the strategy is to life? So that's just sort of, one of the frameworks that we use. But ultimately, whatever the policy and the strategy is, I would just again encourage you, and I think it's going to be really, really important to make sure we bring it to life all throughout the organization, and make sure that everyone is very clear how they're meant to transition through the period, and also where we're going to in terms of the build back better as well. Joel, I'm going to hand over to you, and we'll take some questions at the end. So if you have any questions, we'll all sticking around, and please let us know.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Maja. It's really wonderful to hear. I suppose now that we're starting to speak to clients about this build back better, the future of work, the designing what your future looks like, it's really wonderful. Now, what I actually wanted to talk about is something slightly different, in the sense of what we've tried to do in these lunchtime or these lockdown learning sessions is really work out what might happen in the future, and try to give you guys some of our thoughts, our predictions. They might be accurate, they might not, but they're predictions nonetheless. And one thing I was thinking about the other day, I was listening to a podcast, and they were basically saying that what's really, really important now for public health is testing. So because testing basically, what it does is it essentially drives behaviour. If everyone is being tested and we have really good data on who is infected and who's not, it's going to drive a lot of positive behaviour. And so then I thought, well, if governments are talking about doing that and governments are talking about spending an insane amount of money, what actually is the price of this? Then what I was doing is I read something that the Amazon CEO, Bezos, he had his most recent earnings call, and he said, okay, on the call, he said, investors might want to sit down now. What we're actually going to do is we're going to take our entire $4 billion profit and plough it back into making our business ready to deal in a COVID world. So what does that mean? Well, it means a number of things, but what they're doing is for Amazon, who currently has, I believe, 840,000 people under their employ, what they're doing is they're going to be developing not only testing, but they're going to change the entire way that their business runs. So what they have is essentially they can say that they are the only business that has a COVID-safe supply chain. So if you think about what that does for not only for their customers, it makes it really easy to buy from customers, but it also makes it really good as a perk. So I've got the heading up here, testing as the next perk. I'm being a little bit facetious by that. I mean, by perks, yes, we're going to lose the pool tables, and we're going to lose the foosballs and the orange couches and all that kind of stuff. But what can businesses do? So the next thing I think we're going to see is I've put together just a series of badges. So the WGEA badge, as in if we have this badge, we are a good employer for gender diversity. There's a rainbow tick badge, which I think is a Kiwi badge that where they support the LGBT community. A great place to work, Reconciliation Australia. If you have that badge, then I believe that you are a business that's been accredited by Reconciliation Australia for your RAP. I think what we're going to do is in this middle, that's my really poor attempt at artwork, but I think there's going to be something, there will be a badge developed by someone that is a safe place to work. It might be a COVID safe workplace, something like this. And I think why we're going to do that is to again drive this behavior. But then I thought, okay, well, what is the actual cost of this? Because if you're going to do one of these, if you're going to invest in a safe place to work or a COVID safe badge, what's the ROI? So then I thought, okay, well, how much do these things cost? If you have a search on Amazon.com for the tests, there are very, very few, and all of them very, very dodgy. But as this develops, I reckon we're going to see lots and lots more of these available. Currently, the only one that I could really find, and again, I'm not suggesting anyone goes out and buys this just yet. It's probably a dodgy Brothers R Us version of a test, but it's the best part of 250 or 300 Australian dollars. But of course, long term, as the technology gets better and as the supply gets larger, I reckon we're going to see that price fall significantly. Also had a look at the price of normal flu jabs, and it looks anywhere, but depending on the country you're in, it's anywhere between 50 cents and $100 per jab. So what I've done here is to work out what the ROI on something like this might be, or at least the cost side. I've assumed a cost per test of $50, and I've also assumed that we're going to test our people every 10 days. So what does that look like? Every 10 days with a round number, like again, these are not accurate numbers, but they're really nice and round and easy to deal with numbers. If you've got 250 working days per year and every 10 days, that means you've got 25 tests per person, each at $50. I reckon if you have 5 nurses employed, that means that each of those nurses needs to do 20 tests per day, which sounds about the right number. And nurse salary sounds about the right number at $100,000. I'm sure these numbers aren't accurate, but they're there or thereabouts. So I thought, okay, well, what does it all add up to? $1.75 million is a big number, but then if you consider it, if you've got 1,000 employees, which I'm assuming for this hypothetical example, $1.75 million is only 1.8% of your total wages bill. And what you probably had built into your numbers already from last year is probably something like a 3 or 4% increase in wages that you're going to be paying anyway. Now, the chances that anyone asks for a wage increase this year are next to zero. So essentially, this $1.75 million, it's kind of been paid for. And so what essentially I'm getting to is, why would you do this? Why would you invest an extra 2% of your labour bill to achieve this, to make sure that all of your people are tested? Well, I think you do that because we can read forward that a safe place to work is a safe place to buy from. And I think that what you're going to find is creating a situation where all of your people are tested, and you can create this COVID safe supply chain, is going to be a wonderful way to put yourself ahead of the rest of your competition when things do open up. So I suppose that's really what Maja and I had to say. I'd invite everyone to put any questions through. I reckon probably most of the questions are going to come from around the. I hope that everyone has enjoyed what we've had to say. Maja, I suppose, shall I read out the questions to you? I'll play scribe, or not scribe, but whatever it is.
Yeah, no.
I've got a question.
Yeah, go for it.
Sure. I've got a question here. Will staggered start and finish hours have to be deployed due to lifts and elevators being a huge bottleneck to movement? And will that? And what does the occupancy of the lift look like?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think that the government's already in Australia here had something to say about that. From what we can see, is that is the full recommendation, not purely from an occupancy perspective inside the inside buildings, but also from public transport. I think the public transport, safe distancing is not going to be able to be done unless we have some staggered starts. So I think it's absolutely something that each organization will be looking at, but I think it's going to be the nudge coming even from a regulatory perspective rather than from an organizational perspective. So if anything, if you haven't thought about that, I guess if there is an assumption that people are just going to be coming in, in what they were their old times, I guess the 9 to 5 or whatever your hours look like, that might be very difficult to execute on if you're expecting everyone to be coming in around the same time, because yeah, the government's already pushing things the other way. I think there's going to be, I just think about it, and this is the challenge where a lot of our organizations are. You're going to have some really good data sets into terms of what your movements were before. And I think in order to then look at in facilities, most of the time has that rather from security passes and everything else, like how many people do we have coming in at a standard hours, and what do we do? I think you're going to have to do some planning otherwise. And again, our recommendation is that, we've done so much to be led by the people that we're working with. Is there a potential to start with that? So can you go out to your people and go, hey, do you want to come in? Here's the options, doing some surveying, getting some qualitative and quantitative data, and when do you want to come in, by the way? And then working with that data as you go. But I think agility and an agile mindset and being ready to learn from every single week, and almost setting that and managing that expectation with your people that you will probably have to try, test, and then learn, and maybe even pivot next week is going to be really, really important. You're very unlikely to get it right. All of you who have worked with activity-based working already will have probably seen that it's such a difficult thing, right? Tuesday to Thursday, people are struggling to find a desk, and we think we have the right amount of desks. Monday and Friday, there's no one in the office, right? So there's always this feeling that we never got it quite right. And I think it's just an interesting one. It's hard to get that bit right, but you're going to have to learn as you go and maybe look at some of your data. Thank you for that question.
So next question, actually, and again, encourage everyone to send through your questions. We've got quite a few coming through, but there's some really interesting ones. One question that Maja and I have struggled with, but really grappled with. You mentioned activity-based working. So the question here is activity-based working dead?
Very, very, very good question. And I'm torn on saying one way or another. I know Joel and I, even you and I, have a different. I think it's going to be really difficult to walk away from the amount of infrastructure that people put in place for activity-based working. So to say that it's completely dead, I think for a lot of people that's going to be really hard, because there has been a lot of investment, and let's be honest, nobody is floating in cash now. Rare people are, to actually rethink it. So I think there possible ways that activity-based working can be made to work. I think it's going to make some people deeply uncomfortable sharing a workspace with someone to be able to feel safe, I guess, if we go to that. But, you know, there are things about, I think phones on desks, you know, landlines are gone. That's completely there. We're never going to share those. But, you know, but if there are ways of having a keyboard that somebody takes home and never have to share, and all we're really sharing is a screen that we hopefully don't have to touch, and a surface that we can wipe down in between, obviously with massive investment in cleaning and all that kind of stuff, maybe you can get to the point that people are comfortable with. But I think if people have the ability to possibly look at, okay, hold on, are some people coming in, how much are coming in, can we designate some places where people share maybe with just one person, and they have that desk and they're a little bit more comfortable if they know it's just one versus 10. You know, we're gonna have to work around it. I don't know. I think you're definitely a no, right, Joel?
I think it's very challenged. I think it's challenged in just in a hygiene perspective, if for nothing else. With activity-based working, who's going to want to sit today at a desk that someone might have sneezed on yesterday? And the other piece of activity-based work is designed to create collisions. So I'm not sure that activity-based working has much of a future, but I mean, who knows? Another question coming here from Sarah. What we've been talking about has been very much in an office-based context. So all the Build Back Better that you and I have been speaking about today has been very much in an office-based context. How does it work on a building site?
Yeah, really, you mean from a testing perspective?
No, I think it's both from the Build Back Better perspective, and also that transition. So rather than transitioning back to an office, what does transition back to a work site look like, and what does Build Back Better on that work site look like? What do people have to consider?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think to a certain degree, manufacturing and construction in many, many ways for the longest time have been places that people have said, oh, we can't really look at a lot of autonomy or flexibility. It's too difficult because, you know, you got to be on site and you got to sort of be there and all that type of stuff. But to be honest, even before all this, a lot of organizations had already kind of debunked that. We've worked with manufacturing organizations that actually embedded quite a bit of flexibility, you know, and autonomy as to how people actually organize their shifts, how they choose to, you know, deal with unforeseen things coming up or whatever, while still making sure that every single piece of machinery has, you know, a certain amount of people there, and, you know, it never gets shut down and all that type of stuff. So I think there's certain ways that we can still learn from this, and embed a little bit of, I guess, choice. And some of the organizations that we worked with that are on construction are now going, okay, well, obviously nobody's going to be able to work from home and do any of that kind of stuff. But how do we still really actually question all the assumptions that we had that we can't and one of the assumptions is, you know, that this is only done between this and this hour and it cannot be done and we can't do that. And Mervac has a good case study that they've actually embedded quite a bit of flexibility even for people on site already. So I think really thinking about it's not going to look the same as in the office, but really rethinking about all the assumptions of the hours and I guess very structured shifting and times and all that kind of stuff can actually be played around a little bit more. And it comes down to a team-based approach about how people self-organize to a certain degree to actually get the job done. I think there is a lot of conversation and definitely still learning around the health and safety aspect as well. Obviously, construction has actually continued around Australia majority of the time, and especially in some of the smaller businesses. And I think they are learning as they go quickly. What does that mean? How do you not as much as you can have some aspects of physical distancing, but at the same time, you can't have people, you got to have a trade-off versus physical distancing versus for it not being safe, because sometimes people need to work close together to be actually safe with a piece of equipment they're using. So I think the concept of that autonomy and a bit of agility can still be applied, I guess, even in construction and the building site and manufacturing, by the way. But it's a good moment to actually go and rethink that. Sorry, long answer.
Cool. Yep, no, all good. We like long answers. We like detailed answers. Sally has just flagged here that home testing or private testing in the workplace is currently illegal under the Therapeutic Goods Act. So there might need to be a way that we might have to do that. So thank you for the observation there. Another question coming.
I was just going to say, temperature checking is the first place. We know that a lot of organizations already have that as part of their plan of a transition back, is there will be regular temperature checks. I honestly don't think legislation changes to be really a barrier to anything these days. I mean, we have completely changed even the way our legal system works over the last few weeks to, you know, depositions and things happening online, like the system has completely changed. And I think the government backing is there. If it means safer organizations and safer places, I think we will see lots of change in terms of the legislation as well. But very good point, though, for sure.
Yep. No, thank you, Sally. The next question coming through on KPIs and leadership. So what does leadership look like in a Build Back Better world?
Yeah, it's a really yeah, it's a really good one. What I'm hoping we don't lose, and I guess I really kind of reach out here massively to HR to use all the power, you know, we have built up over the last 6 and 7 weeks, because I think organizations would have been nowhere without people and culture, or really steering the way and getting them in the right place. So I guess this is, to me, a really big one. We have had, as I said, that incredible amount of compassion and empathy really be something that a lot of leaders have really leaned into and tried on. And I think it's reflected and paid us back in spades. So let's, in terms of what leadership looks like, I think a much more empathetic and compassionate sort of leadership style is something that has proven to actually be quite useful in this whole side of things. So sometimes people, you know, need that evidence. I think the other thing is we have had to, and the big thing in terms of all our training is that to manage people in this environment, command and control is just it just does not work, right? We're just going to have to try. We're trying to manage to compliance if we're trying to do that. What we need through this whole uncertainty and ambiguity, we need to manage to or lead for commitment, right? And if we're leading for commitment and not for compliance, then, you know, that is a completely different, that is a coaching leadership style, that is a lot more psychologically safe leadership style. So I think we'll be talking about those concepts to a much, much higher degree, and they will be necessary. We are dealing with humans at their most uncertain, and I think trying to make sure that they stay engaged, we're going to have to kind of engage with that human-to-human level, which we have, which is awesome, right? Over the last little while. So to me, that's a really big part of leadership going forward. In terms of KPIs, you know, leadership and leading to outcomes is something we've been banging on for a very long time, that enables flexibility. People have had to figure out how to do that. And it's been such a fascinating thing to watch, from in the first few weeks when we did some of the training to then where we got to when we were doing some of the webinars and sessions, you know, 6 weeks in, that even the people who are deeply struggling had found a rhythm and they'd found the way. And I think, you know, more and more of that focus of like, actually, hold on, even in knowledge work, which we always said was really hard to manage to outcomes, we actually can build a framework and manage to that. And it's not just about a framework of KPIs, but it's also the framework of I guess, that operating rhythm and a communication cadence, that we are regularly catching up with our people. We're having the conversations about results rather than activities, and we get to a completely different model. So I think it's not necessarily even changing. I think it's just going to be a little bit more robust, and we're going to get better at it as we go forward.
Cool. I reckon that's about it for us. Thank you everyone for joining us. I hope we were able to share some pretty cool ideas and really take you through what we're seeing in the market, because things are moving very, very quickly. I think quicker than any time, certainly in my career, that I've seen. The way that businesses are starting to think it's not even day to day, it's almost hour to hour. So thank you very much, Maja. Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on Build Back Better. Yeah, that's about all we've got. If you want to come through to either Maja or myself, joel@flexcareers.com.au or Maja@flexcareers.com.au. We'd love to contact. We'd love to chat about these ideas and lots of other stuff that's going on in the market too. And we will also send a recording around for everyone who's registered. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Lovely to spend time with you.
Thanks, guys.